by a large margin, humans tend to be monogamous relationships. But as we saw in an earlier chapter, what your residence pattern is what direction you're coming into is gene flow, and that can actually have a real impact on all sorts of biological characteristics, because that's the direction that genes are coming in. So if you're a single male and multiple females, you've got a diverse range of females, but you've only got one male gene that is actually distributing amongst that in terms of offspring until another one comes in. So that can actually give you a bit of directionality to things like genetic evolution. And so gene flow is part of this. So residence patterns can be one male, multi-female. They can be one female, multi-male. Actually, the video shows an example of that. You've got multi-male, multi-female, which is what you tend to get in things like chimpanzee and especially bonobo groups. You get all male packs as well. And these often have one that jockeys for position against a single male harem leader. You also get one male, one female, monogamous. And you also have, especially in the smallest, tiniest brains primates, you have solitary animals that really don't form groups. But that's, amongst primates, quite rare. So, surviving is only really good for you and your genes and producing your phenotype and your life. But in evolutionary terms, that's not enough. You've got to pass those genes on or you're done. That's it. You're no longer part of evolution. And so having a reproduction is also dependent on not just being physically able to do that, but also being selected to do that. So sexual selection is a form of natural selection that can lead to differences in size, coloration, appearance between males and females of a species. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, birds of paradise, when you see a peacock, it's very pretty, right? But it's the male, only the male. A peahen is actually quite plain. They blend into their environment. They're brown and kind of drab. It's the peacocks that are the ones that are flamboyant because they're trying to impress the female. That's part of sexual selection. And the only ones that survive to reproduce are the ones that are the prettiest. And so males tend to either go in the direction of being a particular size or having coloration, which shows that they're successful in the face of something that actually might be a disadvantage to them. It's one way to explain some of these really flamboyant bird displays that are kind of a hindrance to their survival. If they can survive with all of this plumage that's coming off of them, then they must be good, right? And another thing that you see in sexual selection is not just about appearances, though. Appearing healthy and strong and having good genes is something that's going to appeal to a female looking at a male. But also a female is also going to look for, especially in primate groups, someone who's taking care of them over the course of the year. And so behavior is also one of these things that affects sexual selection. If you have ignored a female throughout the year and you've paid attention to some other one, then when the time comes for mating season, you might be selected against. You might not be able to reproduce in that respect. So you better behave right as well. One of the reasons why this is important for males to impress the females is because males can reproduce with numerous females and never have to give birth to that child, whereas a female has only needs to have sex one time, and they then can be pregnant and have offspring. So they want to make sure that they are going to receive care and assistance from the male. So females tend to select males that take care of them because they're going to be stuck with a pregnancy and with rearing a child for literally years. And so this is part of the selection process as well. So we see in primate groups in the wild, in their natural habitat, that the length of pregnancy and the ability to have either a single or multiple births in a year affects behavioral strategies and social grouping as well. So the type of birthing process that you have and the length of child rearing is a factor in behavior as well. But it's not just about reproduction, it's also about survival, because that's really usually the most immediate thing for most creatures, right? And something that was perplexing to biologists in earlier years was the concept of altruism. Altruism is another word for selflessness, giving up of something, giving an advantage to someone else while you get a disadvantage. And that seems counter to evolutionary theory, right? It seems like to go against evolution. Take the advantage when you get it and just move ahead. Forget about those people you're leaving in the dust, right? That would seem to be the way evolution works. But we see things like let's say a flock of birds sitting in a tree, and they're all sitting around chirping away, and one of them looks up to the sky and sees a hawk, and it instinctively says, "Squawk," and it alerts the rest of the flock to the hawk that is nearby. They all fly away, but the squawk that alerted the rest of the birds made that individual who squawked and alerted everyone else the target. So by squawking, you're actually reducing your chances of survival, but you're increasing the chances of survival of your whole group. Now, that seems counterproductive. Wouldn't it be better for that bird to behave in a different way, to see that hawk and say, uh-oh, and quietly tiptoe off of the branch and go away to another tree and get out of sight and let someone else deal with the hawk, right? That is what you might expect a behavior in purely evolutionary terms to behave. But think about gene pools again, remember? So a deme is a population that interbreeds. And you actually share, that flock of birds probably shares genes amongst itself. And so that gene pool is actually larger than just an individual. And you will see that the genes for behavior, the genes for certain types of characteristics advance from generation to generation in the aggregate, in a large sense, which includes altruism that protects the survival of that gene pool. So this means that some groups are actually remarkably cooperative. Something like an ant colony, they're all clones of one another. They share 100% of their genes, which means that if an ant, and this has been observed, and if an ant loses its legs, or most of its legs, it will drag itself over to its brothers, and it will say, "Eat me, because you're better off using my nutrition, because I'm no good anymore." And why would you do that? Individually speaking, a single ant, that's not good for it. It would probably want to get away from its brothers who might attack it, but it actually brings itself towards them. And that's because the genes are 100% the same in those clones that they share with one another. And so they have embedded in their tiny ant brains the behavior to act selfless towards one another. So Also, in primate groups, we have a sort of a more choice because we're cleverer than an ant. We don't just act automatically based on our genes that are pre-programmed into us. But primates can also be remarkably cooperative because we have long memories, and we also need to survive individually. So chimpanzees, for instance, gather together and have hunting parties. They have a diverse range of food. They're mostly vegetarians, but they don't really need the meat, but they do it actually to create social bonds with one another, and it also provides some food which they like. Many primates, including ourselves, groom one another, combing each other's hair, braiding hair, or something like that, is something that you do that you're actually taking care of somebody else, and that's remembered in the future. So little things of paying attention to one another create social bonds that is altruistic, but it's creating a community that helps both of you survive better. This is sort of a mutualism, as it's called, or as if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And why does this occur? Well, there are some functions to having a group and living altruistically. So why do they live in a group in the first place? Because group living has its costs. You have to share whatever food resources that exist in your territory. If you had a territory that you defended, everything in that territory is yours. You don't have to share it. So you can just fight off and say, no, it's mine. And that could be a good strategy. Lots of animals have that sort of a thing. So why live in a group? Well, there's essentially three different strategies that are beneficial from living in a group. First of all, living in a group, especially in a place where predation is high, where you're not the apex predator, but you are surrounded by things that want to eat you, more eyes mean that you have a higher likelihood that someone is going to spot a predator. You're only looking in one direction, your eyes are forward facing, but your buddy behind you is probably got your six. So you've got eyes all over the place. Your chances of being safe in that group increase with more numbers. Also, if a predator does come by, or a competitor or some sort of a group of rivals from the next tree over come to your area, you can mob them. And so if you're on your own, it's really, your own individual fitness that's going to protect you. But with a group, you can outsize them. This is something that we observe in many primate groups across the board, that they mob predators and other rivals. And then there's a third benefit, which is just statistical probability that's been observed from groups of primates in the wild. That in a small group of, let's say, 2 individual organisms, if a predator attacks your group successfully, so if a predator comes and eats one of you, and you're only 2, you have a 50-50 shot of survival, right? It's just statistics, right? If a successful predator comes by, you're either the one that gets eaten or you're not. But if you live in a group of 10 individuals, statistically, your likelihood of the probability of you being eaten drops to 10%. So from 50% to 10%. That's better, right? So 10 individuals already, your statistical likelihood of being eaten it reduces. And in a group of 100, the likelihood that you're the unfortunate individual that gets eaten drops to 1%, right? So statistics, even though they seem very abstract, it's a real thing. And so we can observe this in species of primates in the wild. Also, in terms of survival, you need to acquire food, and it needs to be shared amongst that group when you have a group. So you don't just need to avoid being food, you need to gather enough to survive, grow, maintain your bodies, and reproduce. Primates spend up to about 50% of their time, of their waking day, foraging for food. And success in foraging for food can translate directly into reproductive success for especially female primates, because females with good nutrition reproduce at an earlier age. They also have healthier babies and have a shorter time between babies, which is called an interbirth interval. They also live longer too, and that gives them the ability to reproduce more. So these advantages all add up. So having more food adds up to having a greater overall fitness. A primate's strategy for feeding also depends on some other factors, including quality of food, the distribution of food, and seasonal availability. So you only have what food is available at that time. And some food, like fruit and meat, has more energy per unit size than other things like leaves and grasses. So there's a difference between high quality and high quantity food. So meat and fruit are great if you can get them, but they're just not as available all the time. And leaves and grasses are abundant, but they take a lot of digestion time, and they don't offer very much nutrition, even at the best of times. So this means that primates have to sort of have strategies for getting enough nutrition that they need. So a primate would love to just sit in a tree and eat fruit all day, but because fruit is not as plentiful as grass and leaves, you have different strategies based on which group you live in and what species you are. So you can have, living in the same forest on top of one another, different strategies for eating different types of food. You'll see this in the video. So for instance, actually quite large monkey species is the howler monkey, and they eat nothing but leaves, but they also do almost nothing. They just sit around and digest all day, whereas you get other monkeys species in the same forest living at just a different part of the forest, or maybe eating at a different time of the day, that they're eating like nectar, almost pure sugar, and they require constant feeding, but they have to travel around to get it because each individual flower only has a little bit of that sugar water for them. So the strategies for survival also relate to group size and social behaviors. Also, from observing primate groups, we've learned that we tend to think of ourselves as extremely cultural creatures, but actually other primate groups from observation have been seen to use material culture as well, tools in particular. So chimpanzees have been seen to fashion stabby sticks to stick into little hollows of trees and skewer little monkeys and things and eat them. And this can be passed on as learned behavior. So tools and tool use, we can see from looking at other primate groups that this is an adaptation, a behavioral adaptation, which augments your own physical abilities by creating something and crafting something in the environment that allows you to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do if it was just your body alone. And these sorts of things, the communication, the tool, learned behavior, learning how to make tools, and things like hunting groups, all serve to create social bonds between one another, which then can do things like reinforce territories for that whole group, and protect their food sources from rival groups, and also increase the chances that females and their communities will produce successful offspring. And all of this requires some sort of communication strategies. Primate vocalizations are actually pretty complex. They don't talk like us. We have much more complex vocalization, speech and that sort of thing. But actually, in laboratory experiments with primates, we've been able to teach gorillas and chimpanzees American Sign Language, for instance. And some of them have between 100 and 500 different word vocabularies where they can actually formulate original sentences based on that vocabulary. And they have about the sort of ability to communicate the way a human 2-year-old child would. So that tells us a little bit about brain size and the ability to formulate thought. But all primate groups have some sort of communication strategies that also relate to their subsistence strategies, how they get their food to survive. Like howler monkeys, because they're eating low quality but high quantity food, they have to spend most of their days digesting, and even then it's not very nutritious, so they have to sort of sit around and they don't have a lot of energy to move. So in order to protect their territories, they don't go and do raiding parties on the next tree. They howl at one another, creating one of the largest, loudest sounds in all of nature, in fact. And these have been studied quite a bit. Also, it can be quite complex sounds that are made, determining whether a threat is, let's say, an aerial threat like an eagle or a hawk, or a terrestrial one like a leopard. Because if you just hear a sound that says threat, you might jump up into a tree, right, to get away from the threat. But if that's the case, and the threat is coming from the sky, then you're in trouble. Likewise, if someone says threat, and you drop out of the tree, if that threat is on the ground, like a leopard, then tough luck, you're eaten. So you actually have to know what kind of a threat, and lots of primate groups actually have individual sounds for individual animals that indicate what type of a response you should have to that threat. Also, Campbell monkeys, for instance, have a linguistic ending to their crack sounds. They make a crack sound, but if they vocalize cracoo, that means that the crack actually means that there was a threat that was nearby. But a cracoo means that threat happened in the past. It's like an ed on the end of our words to indicate past tense. So actually, there's been indications that these vocalizations aren't just sounds that they're making that are nonsense.